Hello viewers, today we are going to discuss Joseph Andrews by Henry Fielding, part 1. Before going into the detail of the lesson, let us quickly look into the summary. Henry Fielding's novel, The History of the Adventures of Joseph Andrews and his friend Mr. Abraham Adams, written in imitation of the manner of Cervantes, author of Don Quixote, was published in February 22, 1742. This is a unique narrative piece of the 18th century. This novel is a mixture of comedy and seriousness. Fielding described his novel as a comic epic in prose. Though it began as a travesty, it rose to be the first English novel consciously fulfilling an aesthetic function. The objectives of the lesson are: 1. To acquaint the students with the novel as a genre. 2. To enable the students to decipher the subtle layers that is embedded in the structure of a novel and its difference from a drama or a short story and other literary forms. 3. To acquaint the students with the whole text, its plot and its characters, so that they enjoy the novel not merely as a text, but a reflection of society, its glories and failures. Novel as a genre. The novel as a genre is an extended narrative quite distinct from the short story. A novel is a long narrative in literary prose. The term novel refers back to the beginning of the history of prose writing of the 14th century, including short stories that remained part of a European oral culture of storytelling. Short romances appeared within the frame side with stories of the reveling lower genres such as the fablics. This genre has historical roots both in the fields of the medieval and early modern romance and is a tradition of the novella, meaning a little new thing. The latter supplied to the present this generic term in the late 18th century. Though a novel can be of various types like epistolatory, picaresque or realistic, the genre basically has a definite structure: theme, storyline, plot, characters, a world of make-believe are the basic ingredients of a novel. The contemporary society, its prejudices, joys, frivolities, follies and manners are often the themes of the novel. Fictionality and the presentation in a narrative form are the two features most commonly invoked to distinguish novels from histories or other prose writings. The English novel of today is greatly indebted to Henry Fielding and Samuel Richardson. Fielding's novels, in which the author himself tells a story and controls the plot structure, are considered the first accurate portrayal of contemporary manners. The term literary realism can be applied to the 18th and 19th century fiction, an age which witnessed the rise and growth of this genre. Daniel Defoe, Richardson and Fielding were the main stalwarts of the 18th century who gave the effect of realism to the novel. Henry Fielding's The History of the Adventures of Joseph Andrews and his friend Mr. Abraham Adams, written in imitation of the manner of Cervantes, author of Don Quixote, published in February 22, 1742, is an excellent example of the genre of novel. The History of the Adventures of Joseph Andrews was seen as a huge success with the reading public. It introduced to an idyllic, imaginative world full of farce, brutally satirical, yet with subtle, somber picture of the then contemporary society. After Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, as well as Moll Flanders and Richardson's Pamela, Fielding's writings brought in satirical romances and parody. Beside parodying the existing theatre repertoire, Fielding was known to be a champion for using characters and places that existed and were representatives of real life, in contrast to the charmed warriors, crystal palaces, fairy tales, or winged horses that were much in vogue in prose and epic romances. Joseph Andrews mainly followed the tradition of comic romance, as Fielding fashioned his characters on the pattern of Cervantes' Don Quixote, the greatest of European novels, with its knightly heroes and reluctant, sardonic square Sancho Panza. The novel, apart from being in the tradition of romance, is full of wit, morality, and good sense. Joseph Andrews begins with a preface. The rest of the novel is divided into 4 books comprising of 64 chapters, written in a mock epic style. The preface to Joseph Andrews attempts to explain the nature of the new genre of the novel in contrast to earlier kinds of prose fiction and its relationship to the recognized genres of European literature as first defined by Aristotle. The preface illustrates the theory that distinguishes Fielding's novel from well-known literary forms like epic in verse, the romance, or burlesque. In the preface, Fielding offers a theory for the kind of fiction he has written here. The term romance, as defined by Fielding, is a fantastic, heroic, and pastoral story with magical swords and knights. During the 18th and 19th century, long romance in verse was at times confused with epic poetry. Fielding claims through the preface that his comic epic does not aim at burlesque, mere buffoonery, or clowning. Fielding states that his novel aims at portraying the ridiculous. The History of the Adventures of Joseph Andrews and of his friend Mr. Abraham Adams was not merely a parody, but as announced by Fielding in the preface, it was a kind of writing which I do not remember to have seen hitherto attempted in our language. In this new kind of writing, which Fielding called a comic epic poem in prose, he creatively blended 2 classical traditions, that of the epic, which had been poetic, and that of the drama, but emphasizing the comic rather than the tragic. Another distinction of Joseph Andrews and of the novels to come was the use of everyday reality of character and action as opposed to the fables of the past. Summary and list of characters. The whole story encompasses a journey of Joseph Andrews, the supposed brother of chaste heroine of Richardson's novel Pamela. He is one of the servants of Lady Booby, a rich lady who makes immoral advances towards him. Joseph refuses and defies Lady Booby's advances as he is in love with Fanny, his childhood friend. Therefore, he is compelled to leave her house and journeys home. On his way, he meets Parson Adams, an erudite but eccentric clergyman who becomes Joseph's moral guide throughout his journey. After many adventures, Joseph is reunited with Fanny, and the three of them, Adams, Joseph and Fanny, continue to travel towards Adams Parish. Lady Booby and Pamela Andrews, the supposed sister of Joseph Andrews, known for her chaste mannerisms, try to obstruct the marriage, raising doubts because of Fanny being a servant girl of an unknown parentage. Ultimately, the timely intervention of Mr. and Mrs. Andrews reveals that Fanny is their own daughter stolen by gypsies. Joseph also gets to know his real identity as the son of Mr. Wilson. The two lovers get reunited in marriage by abiding to the church laws. The main characters in the novel are 1. Parson Adams, an erudite scholar with perfect knowledge, a man of good sense and nature, but ignorant of the ways of the changing world. Number 2. Joseph Andrews, a 21 years old man, musical, virtuous, and could retain his purity and chastity due to the influence of Parson Adams. Number 3. Fanny Goodwill, child of Mr. and Mrs. Andrews and sister of Pamela, a modest lady. Number 4. Sir Thomas Booby, husband of Lady Booby, who dies early in the novel. 5. Lady Booby, wife of Sir Thomas Booby, a woman of gaiety who thinks the world to be meant for pleasure. Joseph works as a servant to her and she tries to seduce him, but when she fails at this, she dismisses him from service. Even after this, she is not able to overcome her tempestuous desires. Number 6. Mrs. Slipslop, a paid companion to Lady Booby. 7. Pamela Andrews, thought to be the sister of Joseph, and it's a character based on the heroine of Richardson's novel Pamela. Joseph looks on her as an epitome of chastity. 8. Peter Pons, steward to Lady Booby. 9. Mr. Wilson, the father of Joseph Andrews. 10. Squire Booby, the nephew of Lady Booby and husband of Pamela. 11. Beau Didapier, a typical late 17th or 18th century dandy, a person known for fashionable ways and mannerisms. Plot and critical analysis of the novel, Book 1. The novel is divided into 4 books and each book is divided into chapters. Book 1 begins with the introduction of characters like Parson Adams, Mrs. Lipslop, Squire Booby and Lady Booby, with which Fielding sets the stage. The initial chapters of the novel make it clear that the novel is modelled on a mock epic style. It is in chapter 4 onwards that the readers are taken in medias res, that is, in the middle of the action. Here, Joseph is shown to be transported into a genteel, fashionable life of London and almost becomes a connoisseur of art and taste under the tutelage of Thomas Booby. His lady, on the other hand, is shown to have a deep affinity for Joseph. Chapter 6 to 8 continues with the scenes of the growing relationship between Joseph and Booby, and Lady Booby's innuendo about desiring Joseph. All this leads to various kinds of gossip in the society and Joseph's escape. Chapters 9 to 13 show a dramatic change with Joseph's journey. Away from the malice of Lady Booby and the town, Fielding makes Joseph all set for adventure. The entire spectrum of the reality of human life, its vice and virtue, are all subtly revealed. Joseph's meeting with the robbers and the priest is structured as parallels to portray the sharp contrast of life. Fielding's extensive travels as a barrister on the Western Circuit has made him familiar with coaching inns. The major themes of the episode intertwined are: first, the exposure of the surgeon Barnabas and Mrs. Stowhouse. Secondly, a contrast to these unpleasant and venal individuals is Parson Adams, a man of truth, virtue and positive qualities. In Book 2, one gets to view Fielding's ability to explore the world. A panoramic view of the incidents of the 18th century England is projected through the entire Book 2. Through Joseph Andrews' journey and experiences, Fielding tries to show the socio-political state of England. Although it must be admitted that plot in Joseph Andrews is rudimentary one, its examination reveals many significant episodes. From chapters 4 to 7, the readers get introduced to characters such as Leonora, the daughter of a wealthy landowner who is engaged to Horatio, a young lawyer. The wedding is only 2 weeks away when Leonora, having met another man called Bellarmine, egged by her calculative aunt's unscrupulous motives, takes the decision to jilt Horatio. Though such episodes may seem to be a digression, Fielding's motive was to reveal the politics, hypocrisy and corrupting influence of wealth and fashion on the world. After Leonora's tale, from chapter 7 onwards, Fielding brings in Parson Adams and his various experiences. Here we come to know the court scene, a superbly set piece. This episode is primarily concerned with the dissection of 3 varieties of affectation. First, the issue of political cant. Second, the coward's pretense to courage, and finally, ignorance masquerading as learning. Fielding hated the abuse and distortion of justice, and in the following chapters up to chapter 11, he shows his respect for the law. The readers also get introduced to Fanny. According to Fielding, the truth of life is a matter of circumstances. It is a logical progression. In this novel, within the framework of the adventures of the protagonist in a picaresque structure, the realities of life are highlighted. Through the entire trial scene, which rather becomes a burlesque, quote, kangaroo court scene, the travesty of the law, debasement of courtroom, farce of a hearing room are depicted. From chapter 12 to 17, Joseph and Fanny are brought together. Book 2 is a revelation, especially of Parson Adams and Fielding's assertion in the title page that the novel is written in imitation of the manner of Cervantes. Here, Adams is depicted as a symbol of Christian charity and is a perfect example of Christian chivalry. In this section, one gets introduced to Mr. Wilson through a short journey, adventure, escape and refugee. Fielding again brings out the hard facts of life. Innocence and truth need to be restored amidst deceitful realities of life. Lady Booby's desperate attempt to tarnish the relationship and marriage of Joseph and Fanny is a sharp contrast to the goodness depicted through Adams or Joseph or Fanny. Goodness is a true criterion of a person's worth. Through Adam's goodness and Joseph's learning of goodness and Lady Booby's malicious attempts at evil, Fielding tries to state that goodness is a measure of health in the often sick world of society and worldliness. Thus, in a very subtle way, the hilarious and ludicrous is a means to perceive the simplicity of life, as simplicity cannot be achieved by affectation and hypocrisy. In Book 4, the readers see the triumph of love over all difficulties. In this section, various small incidents are revealed, like the dismissal of Mrs. Slipslop, the long lost child business in the story of the gypsy abduction, the revelation of Fanny's true parentage, the strawberry mark on Joseph's chest that reveals his true parentage, the melodramatic device of incest averted and the avenue of escape so readily at hand and with some objection, and ultimately the union of Joseph and Fanny. Situation and characters are revealed through anagnosis. Anagnosis is a term in Greek tragedy used for recognition, revelation of the characters and situation, which ultimately lead to the resolution of the plot. Thus, all things come to happy conclusion. The lovers are married to live happily ever after. Mr. Booby makes Fanny a present of £2,000. Mr. Adams comes into a decent living. The peddler who has been instrumental in the happy solution of all difficulties is made an exciseman, and ultimately Lady Booby returns to London and meets another man, a young captain. So, the obsession for Joseph and her deceitful motives are soon obliterated. Let us quickly look into the revision part of part 1. Number 1, what is the definition of a novel? The novel as a genre is an extended narrative quite distinct from the short story. A novel is a long narrative in literary prose. The term novel refers back to the beginning of the history of prose writing of the 14th century, including short stories that remained part of European oral culture of storytelling. Coming to the second point, which novelistic tradition did Fielding's Joseph Andrews follow? Joseph Andrews mainly followed the tradition of comic romance, as Fielding fashioned his characters on the patterns of Cervantes' Don Quixote, the greatest of European novels, with its knightly heroes and reluctant, sardonic, square Sancho Panza. Question number 3, what is the structure of the novel? The novel begins with a preface. The rest of it is divided into 4 books, and each book is subdivided in chapters, and totally there are 64 chapters. And coming to the role of the preface to Joseph Andrews, the preface of Joseph Andrews attempts to explain the nature of the new genre of the novel in contrast to the earlier kinds of prose fiction and its relationship to the recognized genres of European literature as first defined by Aristotle. And coming to the theory of fiction, what theory of fiction the author projected in the preface? We can say that Fielding offers a theory for the kind of fiction he has written, saying that romance for various elements in his novels that distinguishes its form as a romance. The romance for Fielding is a fantastic, heroic and pastoral stories with magical swords and knights. See you in the next class. Bye.